The city never really sleeps. But that night, New York felt unusually alive, its rain-soaked streets reflecting the chaos Chloe Johnson could no longer contain inside her chest. Headlights blurred into ribbons of white and gold as she drove through the storm, her fingers clenched so tightly around the steering wheel that her knuckles turned pale. Her phone buzzed again. A message from her colleague, Charles's, still at the office. Chloe's with him. They've been in the conference room for hours. For a second, she almost laughed. It sounded absurd. Her husband, Charles Sterling, the billionaire real estate mogul, working late again with her best friend. But deep down, something inside her had already begun to fracture. The unease that had been whispering for months was now screaming. Chloe's reflection in the rearview mirror looked foreign, eyes, wide skin glistening with sweat, despite the cold. Her baby kicked once faintly, as if sensing her heartbeat spiraling out of rhythm. "It's okay, little one," she whispered, voice trembling. "Mommy just needs to know." By the time she reached Sterling Tower, midnight had melted into rain. The glass facade shimmered like a mirror of deceit, and Chloe could see her own distorted reflection as she rushed inside. The lobby was quiet, security guards half asleep. Her heels clicked against marble, steady at first, then uneven as she reached the private elevator. She pressed the button for the 40th floor where the boardroom lights were still on. Her pulse echoed louder than the rain. When the elevator doors opened, she was greeted by silence, thick, expensive silence. Then a sound. Laughter. Soft, intimate, utterly familiar. Through the frosted glass of the conference room, she saw them. Charles, Chloe, his hand resting on hers. Their faces too close, their smiles too gentle. For a moment, Chloe's body forgot how to breathe. The sight didn't scream betrayal. It whispered it quietly, cruelly, as if the world had decided to mock her in slow motion. The room beyond the glass was warm and golden. She stood outside in the cold blue light of the corridor, a ghost looking in. She took one step back, then another. Her vision blurred. Her hand found the wall, searching for something solid, something real. But all she could hear was Chloe's laughter, light, melodic, and sharp as broken glass. The next sound was her own gasp, and then the world turned black. She woke to a ceiling of white. The sterile hum of machines filled her ears before the pain arrived, slow, deep, crawling from her abdomen, upward, like fire. "Mrs. Sterling." The nurse's voice was soft, cautious. "You're in Mount Sinai Hospital. You had a fall. We did everything we could." Chloe tried to move, but her body felt alien heavy. "My baby." She croaked the words, scraping her throat. The nurse's eyes flickered, and that was enough. Chloe didn't need to hear the rest. She felt it in her bones, the emptiness, the unnatural stillness where life had once moved. Moments later, Charles's voice cut through the haze. "Chloe," she turned her head slowly. He looked immaculate even in gilt-tailored suit, wet hair, swept back, eyes rehearsed for remorse. His hand hovered near hers but didn't touch. "The doctor said you'll recover." He began, his tone that of a man giving a quarterly report. "It was a difficult procedure, but you're safe now." Her eyes flicked toward him, dull, but sharp enough to make him pause. "Procedure." He hesitated. "They had to remove your uterus. It was the only way to save you." The words dropped like stones in a pond, spreading silent ripples of horror. Chloe's breath caught in her throat. "Remove," she whispered. "You mean?" "I can't." Charles rushed to fill the space. "We'll find another way. There are options. Surrogacy, IVF. Whatever you want." She closed her eyes. "Whatever you want, you mean?" He exhaled, frustrated, as if her grief were inconvenient. "Chloe, I'm trying to be here for you." Her lips parted, but the sound that came out wasn't a sob. It was a laugh, low, brittle, dangerous. "You're here," she said quietly. "But where were you before?" Charles's jaw tightened. "Don't do this right now." Her fingers twitched. "Don't what?" "Feel blame me," he said, voice hardening. "You shouldn't have been there, Chloe. You're 6 months pregnant. What were you thinking, running around in the middle of the night?" She looked at him, then really looked, and something inside her shifted. The man who had once been her anchor now looked like the reason she'd drowned. "You're right," she murmured. "I shouldn't have been there." Her eyes filled with quiet fire. "But you shouldn't have given me a reason to." When he left the room, she stared at the ceiling until the shadows on it began to move. The rain still fell outside, steady and relentless. Each drop against the window was like a heartbeat she no longer trusted. The nurse came in to check her vitals, her gaze careful, pitying. "You should rest, Mrs. Sterling," she said gently. Chloe turned to her. "If you ever have to choose between saving your life and saving your heart," she whispered, "which would you pick?" The nurse froze, unsure how to answer. "I lost both," Chloe said, and closed her eyes. Days passed, but time didn't move. Flowers arrived, lilies, orchids, cards from business partners who called her strong. Charles visited less. Chloe didn't visit at all. The nurses began to look at her differently. She could feel it, the pity, the gossip. She learned to smile back, to pretend. But inside, a storm was building, quiet, disciplined, waiting for purpose. On the 7th night, she asked the nurse for a mirror. When she saw her reflection, pale skin, dark circles, a faint scar just above her hip, she didn't recognize the woman staring back. That woman looked like a victim, someone whose story was written by someone else. Chloe's fingers tightened around the mirror's edge until her knuckles whitened. "No," she whispered, "not anymore." She thought of Chloe, of laughter behind glass walls, of Charles's hand brushing another woman's skin. And for the first time, she didn't cry. She simply recalculated. When Charles came the next morning, carrying peonies and guilt, he found her sitting upright, hair brushed, eyes alert. "You look better," he said cautiously. "I am," she replied. "I've been thinking." "About what?" "About rebuilding," she said. "You love rebuilding things, don't you?" He blinked, unsure. "Of course." She smiled faintly. "Then you'll understand when I say, sometimes, before you rebuild, you have to burn everything down." Charles frowned. "Chloe, what are you talking about?" She tilted her head, her voice soft and even. "About the life we built on lies." He tried to laugh it off. "You're still weak. You need to rest. Don't say things you'll regret." She looked past him toward the rain outside. "Oh, Charles," she said, almost tenderly, "I've already lost everything I could regret." For the first time, he had no reply. That night, when the hospital lights dimmed, Chloe lay awake, tracing the faint outline of her scar beneath the blanket. Her hand trembled, but not from fear. A memory surfaced, her grandmother's voice years ago, in Louisiana, telling her, "When a woman falls, baby, don't ask how hard she hit the ground. Ask what she saw while she was down there." Chloe finally understood. She had seen the truth, raw, merciless, illuminating. Outside, dawn crept through the blinds, painting her room in muted gold. The city was still wet, but lighter somehow, as if it too was trying to forgive itself. A knock at the door. The nurse entered with a discharge form. "You're free to go today, Mrs. Sterling." Free. The word felt strange on her tongue. Charles wasn't there to pick her up. She didn't wait. Chloe walked slowly down the corridor, her steps measured, deliberate. Every echo of her heels against tile sounded like punctuation, an ending and a beginning. She stopped by the hospital window for one last look at the skyline. The city stretched endlessly before her, cold, indifferent, beautiful. Somewhere out there, her husband and her best friend believed they'd broken her. They hadn't. They'd built her. Chloe pressed her palm against the glass, her reflection merging with the glow of dawn. You took my child, she whispered, her voice steady. But you gave me back myself. The rain had finally stopped, and beneath the quiet hum of the city, something inside her began to move again, not a heartbeat, but a promise. The weeks after the hospital blurred into silence, an elegant, suffocating kind of silence that only the wealthy know how to maintain. Everything in the Sterling penthouse gleamed again, marble floors, glass walls, the view of Manhattan, glittering like temptation itself. Only Chloe had stopped shining. People called to offer condolences, but she declined every visit. I'm fine, she said, each time sounding less human. It was just a miscarriage. That lie, 2 words became her armor. Just a miscarriage. Easier than saying, I can never have children again. Easier than watching pity turn into gossip, sympathy, into judgment. Charles never questioned it. He accepted her silence like a gift, or perhaps a shield for his own guilt. He filled their home with expensive distractions, new art, new wines, new projects, but never new love. At dinner, he talked about quarterly earnings, while she pushed peas across her plate. Their conversations became choreography, predictable, rehearsed, flawless from the outside. Are you eating? He'd ask. I'm fine, she'd reply, and silence would resume, elegant as ever. When his mother, Margaret Sterling, came to visit, the silence finally cracked. She arrived wrapped in pearls and authority, her voice sharp enough to slice the air. You've lost weight, she said by way of greeting, her eyes scanning Chloe like a ledger. Grief is no excuse for neglecting yourself or your husband. Chloe smiled politely. I'm managing Margaret. You're coping, dear. Not managing. The older woman sat crossing her legs with deliberate grace. Charles tells me you haven't been attending any of the charity galas. It gives people ideas. Chloe lifted her chin. Ideas that perhaps you're not fulfilling the role expected of you. The words landed like stones. Margaret never said mother or heir, but they hovered there unsaid, like a shadow behind her perfectly painted lips. Chloe folded her hands to hide the tremor. Roles are flexible, Mrs. Sterling. The world's changing. Margaret's smile was ice. The world changes, my dear, but legacy doesn't. When she left, the scent of her perfume lingered like judgment. That night, Charles didn't come home until nearly 2. Chloe heard him fumbling with his keys, the quiet click of his shoes on hardwood. She pretended to sleep, but her body stiffened when she smelled another perfume, something citrusy and new. He slid into bed without a word, turning his back to her. The distance between their bodies might as well have been continents. She stared at the ceiling until dawn, the sound of the city seeping through the curtains like a cruel lullaby. By morning, she had decided something quietly radical. She would not beg. At first, she filled her days with mechanical things, cleaning, organizing, pretending. But one afternoon, while deleting spam emails, she stumbled upon a newsletter from Columbia University, Executive Law and Finance for Non-Law Professionals. The words pulsed on the screen like a door slightly ajar. That evening, she registered. No one needed to know. Charles thought she spent her afternoons at yoga, In reality, she took the subway downtown, sitting among 20-somethings in suits who looked at her like she didn't belong. But every lecture, every case study, every word about corporate ethics or shareholder rights stitched something back together in her. It wasn't revenge. Not yet. It was survival. Knowledge became the only thing she could still give birth to. She began to see the world differently. The legal jargon in Charles's emails, the subtle manipulations in company press releases, the quiet sexism hidden under smiles at board meetings she'd once attended as the CEO's wife. Late at night, while Charles snored beside her, she'd read case files under the faint glow of her laptop. Every word of power and control of assets and liabilities felt like a language she was finally learning to speak. Sometimes, she'd pause watching his reflection in the dark glass of the window. The city lights flickered behind him, and she wondered how long it would take before his empire cracked from the inside. Then one night it happened, the moment her heart finally stopped breaking and started hardening. Charles had fallen asleep with his phone on the nightstand screen still glowing faintly. She wasn't looking for anything. She told herself that even as her eyes landed on the notification banner. "Chloe, you deserve better. I can't wait until it's just us." Her pulse went cold. She hesitated, then unlocked it. The passcode hadn't changed. The conversation unfolded like a confession written in neon Chloe. "She's fragile. Be gentle when you end it." Charles. "I know. I'll file soon. You're the one I want." Chloe. "Then do it. Do it." The two words burned through her like acid. She sat there still for what felt like hours. The city hummed outside, oblivious. Then slowly she began to laugh. It wasn't loud or hysterical. It was soft, dry, almost graceful. The kind of laugh that doesn't ask permission. Charles stirred beside her. "What are you doing?" "Nothing," she said, locking his phone and setting it back down. "Go back to sleep." He muttered something incoherent and drifted off again. Chloe lay awake until dawn, eyes open, mind sharp as glass. She had always believed betrayal was loud, shouting, slamming doors, tears. But no. True betrayal was quiet. It smiled in your face. It kissed your cheek goodnight. The next morning she brewed his coffee, handed him his tie, and kissed his cheek before he left. The performance was flawless. Only her eyes betrayed the shift. As soon as the door clicked shut, she went to her study, pulled out a leather-bound notebook, and wrote in clean, deliberate strokes, "If he wants war, I will give him one. Not with fury, but with precision. I'll fight in his language money law control." She paused. Then, in smaller handwriting, added, "This time I won't lose." Over the next few months, Chloe built her secret life layer by layer. She opened a separate bank account under her maiden name, Johnson. She consulted quietly with a lawyer, posing as a friend of a woman in trouble. She studied everything about Sterling Enterprises, the ownership structure, the voting shares, the trust funds. Her nights were a paradox of calm and fire. While Charles grew careless in his deceit, she sharpened her mind like a blade. Sometimes she'd pass by his study and hear his voice, low, intimate, speaking to Chloe. "I just need time. You know how things are with her." And Chloe would smile. Time, she'd think. "That's exactly what I need too." One afternoon, she met Charles for lunch at the rooftop restaurant where he had first proposed. The irony was delicious. He ordered wine. She declined. "You've been quiet lately," he said, his tone vaguely concerned, but mostly distracted. "I've been learning," she replied. "Learning what?" She smiled. "How to listen." He chuckled, not understanding. "That's good, I guess." She leaned back, studying him. "You look tired, Charles. Running two companies must be exhausting. He frowned. Two sterling enterprises, she said lightly. And Chloe. He froze. The waiter appeared, breaking the moment. When he left, Charles leaned forward, whispering sharply. What are you implying? Nothing, she said, picking up her glass of water. Just observing. I've gotten good at that. She took a slow sip, watching the flicker of panic behind his eyes. It was the first real emotion she'd seen from him in months, and it tasted better than revenge. That night, she wrote again in her journal, he's unraveling, but not enough. Not yet. I have to be patient. Power is earned in silence. Her handwriting was steady, elegant. Then she added almost like a prayer, let him keep believing I'm broken. That's how I'll win. But there was one thing she hadn't accounted for Chloe. Chloe had always known her friend's ambition, her hunger disguised as empathy. But now, Chloe began showing up everywhere. Chloe turned charity galas, press events, even their favorite cafe downtown. One evening, Chloe approached her with an almost genuine smile. Chloe, I've missed you. You've been so distant. Chloe smiled back, perfectly polite. Distance keeps things in perspective. Chloe tilted her head, feigning confusion. I just hope we're still friends. Of course, Chloe said smoothly. Friends always tell each other the truth, don't they? For a moment, Chloe's mask cracked. Her smile stiffened, but she recovered quickly. Always. As she walked away, Chloe watched her go, the sound of Chloe's heels echoing through the marble lobby like a countdown. Later that night, alone in the apartment, Chloe sat by the window, city lights flickering against her face. Her reflection stared back, calm, unreadable. She opened her laptop and typed 3 words into a search bar. Corporate whistleblower protection. Her finger hovered over enter for a long time. Then she pressed it. The screen filled with results, laws, possibilities. And there, for the first time, she saw not her pain, but her weapon. Outside, thunder rolled again over the skyline, just like the night she lost everything. Only this time, she wasn't the woman falling. She was the one preparing to rise. To the world, Charles Sterling was perfection, sculpted into human form. Handsome, philanthropic, articulate. The kind of man Fortune magazine called a vision of modern leadership. Cameras loved him, and he knew how to love them back, with that calculated smile, that effortless charm. He gave interviews about integrity in business and family values, always dropping Chloe's name like an accessory that made him appear more grounded. My wife keeps me humble, he once said on national television. Chloe had watched that segment from the penthouse balcony, champagne in hand, the skyline blazing behind her. He looked into the camera like he was confessing something sacred. She knew better. Behind that public mask, Charles's empire was cracking quietly and visibly in the way only arrogance allows. It began with whispers in financial columns, Sterling Enterprises Capital, suddenly diversifying into a new firm, Loom Design Group, owned by none other than Chloe Moore. At first, Chloe dismissed it. A coincidence, perhaps. But when she checked the SEC filings, the connections were too neat to ignore. Same board lawyer, same funding structure, same offshore account based in the Cayman Islands. She stared at the documents glowing on her laptop screen, her pulse steady, her mind frighteningly calm. So, that's how they were doing it. Charles was funneling company funds, money belonging to shareholders, into Chloe's boutique firm. Not out of strategy, out of lust. She felt something inside her click. Not rage, this time clarity. In the weeks that followed, she became a ghost moving through his world. She no longer challenged him. No questions, no fights. She smiled when he spoke, nodded when he lied. It was the perfect camouflage. Charles, mistaking silence for surrender, grew careless. He left files open on his office laptop, emails half sent. Chloe memorized everything, dates, amounts, transactions. She printed copies, backed them up to encrypted drives, stored them in a safety deposit box, registered under her maiden name. Every secret he hid, she collected. Every weakness he denied, she documented. She didn't need a weapon. She was one. One evening, a gala at the Sterling Foundation. Chandeliers like constellations, guests in tuxedos and silk gowns. Charles worked the room like a politician, laughing too easily, touching too often his arm, occasionally brushing Chloe's as they posed for photos. Chloe stood across the hall in a silver dress, a flute of champagne untouched in her hand. Their eyes met for a moment, his full of confidence, hers unreadable. When a journalist asked for a photo of Mr. and Mrs. Sterling, she obliged. She smiled, flawless, radiant even. But inside she whispered to herself, "Take the picture. You'll need evidence of the last time I ever played your wife." Later that night, she returned home before him. The apartment smelled like rain and whiskey. The city outside roared with life, but she felt detached, untethered. When Charles finally came in past midnight, tie loose smile, lazy, he looked almost human, vulnerable even. "Long night?" she asked softly. He poured himself another drink. "Networking. You know how these events are?" She nodded. "Of course." For a moment there was silence. Then he turned toward her, glass in hand. His voice was lower, gentler. "I've made mistakes," he said. "But everything I've done, every wrong turn, it's because I wanted to protect what we built." Chloe tilted her head. "Protect from what?" He shrugged, his eyes foggy with alcohol. "From losing control. From losing us." "Us," she repeated, almost amused. He stepped closer, placing a hand over his heart. "You're still the one I chose, Chloe. Always will be." Her gaze drifted down to his hand, the one that had once signed her pain into permanence. "Charles," she said softly, placing her palm on his chest over that steady lying heart. "A man who says he loves but still betrays, he's not afraid of losing his wife." He blinked, confused. "Then what is he afraid of?" She smiled faintly. "Losing control." He stared at her, the meaning slipping just out of reach. Then he exhaled, turning away. "You always were dramatic." She watched him walk toward the bedroom, shoulders swaying slightly from drink. Her hand slipped into her robe pocket. Inside, a small recorder blinked red, capturing every word. The next morning, Charles was all charm again, making espresso and talking about weekend plans. Chloe played along, her voice steady, her smile precise. She excused herself to her studio, a minimalist room flooded with pale morning light. There, she uploaded the recording, encrypted it, and saved it under a simple title, Face 1. That afternoon, she recorded another, a call between Charles and Chloe. "Charles, don't worry. The board will approve the merger. I'll handle it. Chloe and the money transfer, Charles, already done. No one will trace it. They trust me." She listened twice, then labeled that file, Face 2. 2 faces, 2 lives. One man about to be undone by his own voice. The more she uncovered, the more she realized how deep his duplicity ran. Fake consulting firms, forged invoices, charities used to mask corporate theft. Each discovery was like peeling a layer of skin from something rotten beneath. Yet the more damning the evidence grew, the calmer she became. It wasn't hate anymore, it was strategy. Every betrayal had turned her into something precise, methodical, unstoppable. At night, she would sit on the balcony, the wind tangling her hair, and whisper to the skyline. I see you now, Charles. Not the man you show the world, but the one you hide in the dark. And I'm not afraid of him anymore. But the human heart, even the most disciplined one, isn't made of steel. One evening, as she sorted through documents, she found an old photo Charles and her standing in front of their first apartment. He was holding her from behind, both of them laughing. Her eyes softened for a second. She remembered that girl, the one who believed love was safety. She closed her eyes and let the memory dissolve. Then she tore the photo in half and slipped it into the trash. Days turned into weeks. The walls of Charles's perfect world began to tremble subtly at first. Rumors in the office about financial irregularities, shareholders asking questions, anonymous documents sent to journalists. He came home angry more often, snapping at her over trivial things. One night he slammed his briefcase on the counter. Someone's leaking information. It's sabotage. Really, she said calmly. Who would do such a thing? He looked at her for a long time, as if trying to read her face. Then he shook his head. You wouldn't understand. No, she said softly. You're right. I wouldn't. That weekend, Charles disappeared for 2 days without explanation. When he returned, his shirt smelled faintly of Chloe's perfume. Chloe didn't say a word. She didn't need to. She'd already logged his flight records, his hotel receipts, his GPS trail. Every secret he kept was another thread in the net she was weaving. One night, around 3 a.m., she stood in their living room surrounded by scattered papers and USB drives. The city outside glowed like an ocean of fire. She realized that what she was building wasn't just evidence, it was liberation. For years, she had been the shadow in his success story. The quiet wife, the accessory in interviews. Now, she was rewriting her part. When the clock struck 4, she opened her journal and wrote her first line, in weeks. Justice isn't revenge. It's remembering who you are and refusing to let them rewrite it. At dawn, Charles stumbled in again, half drunk, half guilty. He looked at her from the doorway, the faintest trace of shame crossing his face. You're awake, he muttered. I couldn't sleep, she said. Chloe. He hesitated. You know, for what it's worth, I didn't mean for things to get this complicated. She smiled gently. Complicated is what happens when you live 2 lives too long. He frowned, stepping closer. What does that mean? Nothing you'll understand right now. He studied her face, then sighed. You've changed. Not changed, she corrected. Evolved. He stared for a moment longer before retreating to the bedroom. Chloe watched the door close, her reflection in the glass, faint but steady. She picked up her recorder, pressed play, and listened to his drunken confession echo back through the empty room. Each word was another nail in the coffin of his carefully constructed image. She leaned back, whispering to herself. Almost there. Outside, the first light of morning painted the skyline in silver. Somewhere in the city, a storm was gathering of her own making. And when it broke, it wouldn't destroy her. It would baptize her. The storm broke quietly. No thunder, no lightning, just a stillness too sharp to be peace. Within days, subtle tremors rippled through Sterling Enterprises. Board members whispered behind closed doors. Emails went missing, and accountants began to question numbers that no longer added up. From the outside, everything still gleamed. Glass towers, luxury cars, gala invitations. But inside the empire, Charles built the foundation had started to rot, and for the first time, he could smell it. It began with a call. Charles, we need to talk, said one of the board members, his voice tight. Someone sent the audit team internal transfers, large ones from the foundation accounts, all routed through Loom Design. Charles froze. His throat went dry. That's absurd. It's not absurd if there are signatures, Charles. Yours, to be exact. He hung up before the conversation could continue, the edges of his composure cracking. His empire had always been built on control, careful, immaculate control. And now it was slipping through his fingers. Meanwhile, in the quiet elegance of the penthouse, Chloe was serene. She sat by the window with a glass of red wine, the city's lights painting gold across her skin. Her laptop lay open beside her, screens filled with legal documents, financial reports, and the controlled chaos she'd unleashed. She didn't smile. Not yet. Revenge wasn't joy. It was justice rehearsed to perfection. When the intercom buzzed, she knew before the voice spoke who it was. Chloe. It's Chloe. Of course. Chloe entered the apartment with her usual perfume, expensive, cloying, self-assured. Her red lips curved into what might have passed for concern. God. Chloe, it's been forever, she said, walking in like she still owned the place. You look good. Chloe stood slow and composed. You always did prefer understatement. Chloe chuckled. I just wanted to check in. Things at the company are well complicated. I'm sure you've heard. I've heard a lot lately. For a moment, silence. Then Chloe stepped closer, her tone softening, rehearsed. You should let go, you know. Whatever bitterness you're holding, love can't save a dead marriage. Chloe studied her. Not the words, but the tremor just beneath them, the faint anxiety of someone who knows their lie is unraveling. She turned, poured 2 glasses of wine, and handed one to Chloe. The red liquid shimmered between them, like truth waiting to be spilled. You're right, Chloe said. Love can't save what's already dead. Chloe exhaled in relief, smiling. Exactly. I knew you'd understand. But Chloe continued, her voice steady as glass. There's still something worth saving. Oh, my dignity. Chloe's smile faltered. The sound of the clock filled the pause. What do you mean by that? Chloe took a slow sip, eyes locked on hers. You'll find out soon enough. Chloe's expression shifted, curiosity, giving way to unease. She placed her glass down, forcing a laugh. You've always had a flair for drama. And you, Chloe replied, have always mistaken silence for weakness. Chloe opened her mouth to respond, but Chloe was already walking toward the window, her reflection doubled in the glass. Calm, unflinching, untouchable. Enjoy your evening, Chloe, she said softly. It might be the last one you spend in peace. Chloe hesitated, then left. Her perfume lingered long after she was gone, mingling with the scent of wine and storm air. The next morning, every board member of Sterling Enterprises received an anonymous email. Attached a dossier of transactions, internal memos, and one audio file labeled Sterling Fraud Recordings. By noon, the press had it. By evening, the company's stock had plummeted 12%. By nightfall, Charles's name was trending. Charles Sterling, under investigation for financial misconduct. Billionaire CEO accused of funneling company funds to secret partner. Chloe watched the headlines from her kitchen counter, sipping her morning coffee. Her phone buzzed relentlessly. Reporters' acquaintances, even distant relatives she hadn't spoken to in years. She ignored them all. Then came the call she'd been waiting for. Chloe. His voice cracked through the speaker. Sharp, panicked, drunk on fear. It's you, isn't it? She let the silence stretch. The city hummed faintly in the background. Tell me it's not you, Charles said again, louder this time. Who else would have access to those files? Who else would know where to look? Chloe set her cup down gently. You sound scared, Charles. Damn it, Chloe, his voice broke. You've destroyed everything. Do you have any idea what you've done? She almost smiled. Everything you built was already rotten. I just opened the window. Was it you? He demanded. Chloe tilted her head, her voice soft as velvet. No, she said. It was your karma. Then she ended the call. For hours after she sat in stillness, the city outside was chaos, paparazzi gathering news vans, circling Sterling Tower, social media burning. She could almost feel Charles, pacing somewhere, tearing through his empire, trying to find a way out. She thought of the man he used to be, the charming dreamer, who once painted the future in golden strokes. She had loved that man. She had believed in that man. But the one who replaced him, greedy, arrogant, untouchable, had built his life on bones, and bones, she knew, eventually crumble. That evening, the penthouse phone rang again. This time, she didn't answer. Charles left a voicemail instead. His voice was lower now, trembling. Chloe, please, we can fix this. I'll make it right. I'll resign. I'll pay back the money. Just don't let them destroy me. She played it twice, not for satisfaction, but for confirmation. The sound of a man who finally realized that consequences have teeth. Hours later, Chloe's name began appearing in the reports too. Investigators had found her company's accounts linked directly to Sterling Enterprises' internal funds. Her face, flawless, smug, now adorned tabloids under the headline, CEO's Mistress, Implicated in Fraud Scandal. Chloe stared at the photo. Chloe's carefully curated perfection now looked hollow, brittle. Poetic, she murmured, closing the browser. At midnight, the storm returned, real this time. Rain lashed against the windows, thunder rolling over the skyline. Chloe stood by the glass wall, wineglass in hand, the city shimmering below like a mirror of her own reckoning. She thought of everything she had lost, a child, a marriage, her illusions, and everything she had gained, truth, power, freedom. But most of all, clarity. Because now she understood something Charles never would. Revenge wasn't destruction. It was transformation. Down in the streets, cameras flashed as Charles's car pulled up to the Sterling Tower. He stumbled past reporters, his face pale, his jaw tight. No comment, he muttered over and over. Inside, his board was waiting. Some looked betrayed, others hungry sharks circling a bleeding king. As the storm raged outside, he felt the walls close in. He dialed Chloe again, one last time. Please, he whispered when she answered. I can't breathe. Chloe looked out the window, the reflection of lightning crossing her eyes like fire. You'll survive, she said quietly. You've always been good at pretending. And she hung up. When dawn arrived, the city was washed clean. Chloe opened the balcony doors, letting the wind move through the apartment. The air smelled of rain and release. She set her wineglass down and picked up her journal. On the first blank page, she wrote, "The truth doesn't destroy, it reveals." She paused, then added a second line. "Tomorrow the world will know who I've become." She closed the notebook, her expression serene. Far below, the first reporters of the day gathered around Sterling Tower. And somewhere within those walls, Charles Sterling, once untouchable, once adored, was about to learn what it truly meant to fall. But Chloe's story wasn't over. As she turned from the window, her phone buzzed an unfamiliar number. When she answered, a calm male voice spoke. "Mrs. Sterling, my name is Malik Adams. I represent several investors interested in rebuilding what your husband broke. They believe you might be the right person to lead." Chloe glanced at the rain-soaked skyline, the corners of her lips curving ever so slightly. "Mr. Adams," she said, "you might be right." Harlem woke early. Even before sunrise, its streets were alive. The hum of coffee carts, the laughter of neighbors. the quiet rhythm of survival stitched into every sound. It was nothing like the sterile perfection of Midtown. Here, walls had stories, and every crack carried the memory of someone who had refused to disappear. That was why Chloe chose it. 2 months after the fall of Sterling Enterprises, she left the penthouse behind without ceremony. No headlines, no goodbye. Just a single suitcase and a train ride north to a part of the city that didn't ask who you had been, only who you wanted to become. Her new apartment was small, 2 rooms, uneven floorboards, a window that overlooked 125th Street, but it felt alive. The smell of old wood, the hum of gospel music from a neighbor's radio, the sound of rain against tin roofs. It was imperfect human. For weeks she barely spoke to anyone. She rebuilt herself in silence, one habit at a time. Mornings were for walks along the river, afternoons for sketching lines, shapes, ideas she'd long abandoned. Nights for tea and reading, though sometimes she simply stared out at the city lights and tried to remember what peace was supposed to feel like. One evening, under the dim glow of a single lamp, Chloe stood before the bathroom mirror. Her reflection was familiar, but foreign, long dark curls, cascading down her back. The same hair Charles once called his crown of pride. She reached for the scissors. At first her hand trembled. The first snip sounded too loud, too final. But once she started, she couldn't stop. Strand after strand fell to the floor, curling like question marks at her feet. When she was done, she ran her fingers through the uneven edges and whispered to the woman in the mirror. The beauty he admired was never yours to define. Now it's mine. It wasn't vanity. It was resurrection. That same night, she opened her laptop and began designing again. Not the sterile corporate towers Charles loved, but homes, old brownstones, weathered by time, ready to be reborn. Her idea was simple: rebuild forgotten spaces for women who had nowhere to start again. She called it Rebirth Design. It began as a sketch, then a blueprint, then a calling. Within weeks, she was pitching the concept to local nonprofits, women's shelters, and investors who believed in second chances. Most said no. A few smiled politely. Then came Malik Adams. He was nothing like the men she'd known in Charles's world. His suit was worn but neat, his tone measured but warm. He didn't interrupt. He didn't flatter. He listened. When she finished presenting, Malik sat back, studying her quietly. "So," he said, "you want to rebuild homes for women starting over?" "Not just homes," she replied. "Sanctuaries. Places where broken things can still be beautiful." He nodded slowly. "You sound like someone who's had to start over herself." Chloe met his gaze without flinching. "Haven't we all?" A small smile curved his lips. "Most people want to erase their past. You're building on top of yours. That's rare." He extended his hand. "I want in." Malik wasn't like the investors she used to impress with designer heels and flawless presentations. He didn't care about quarterly returns or media buzz. He cared about impact. They spent long days walking through abandoned houses together, dust echoes, graffiti, broken glass. Where others saw ruin, they saw potential. "This one," Malik said one afternoon, stepping into a crumbling brownstone near 7th Avenue. "It feels like it's waiting for someone." Chloe ran her hand along the peeling wallpaper, like it's been holding its breath for too long. He glanced at her. "Kind of like you?" She smiled faintly. Maybe. Working with Malik changed something in her, not the way Charles had changed her through pain, but the way sunlight slowly coaxes a flower to bloom again. He never asked about her past. He never treated her like a wounded thing, and yet he saw her entirely. One evening, after a long day of site visits, they stopped by a small cafe, tucked between two murals. The owner, a woman in her 60s, poured them coffee and played soft jazz through an old speaker. Malik leaned back, watching the rain against the window. "You know, he said most people who've been through hell try to outrun it. You're turning it into architecture." Chloe chuckled. "I guess pain needs a blueprint too." He looked at her, then, not with pity, but with something steadier. "You don't need saving, Chloe. You just need someone to remember that you're already strong." Her chest tightened. It had been so long since anyone had said something that kind, and for the first time in months, she cried not from sorrow, but from recognition. Days became weeks. The first rebirth design project broke ground, a row of neglected townhouses that would soon become homes for single mothers. Every morning, Chloe arrived, early blueprint tube under her arm, hard hat slightly too big. The workers called her Miss Rebirth. She laughed every time they said it, but secretly it felt like a name she'd earned. When the first wall went up, she stood back and watched the bricks being laid, each one a reminder that creation could come from collapse. But as her world began to rebuild, whispers from her old life started to reach her again. Charles had vanished from the public eye, but rumors swirled: frozen assets, lawsuits, a pending trial. Chloe, too, had gone silent. Sometimes journalists would show up outside her office hoping for a statement. She said nothing. She owed the past no explanation. And yet, late at night, when she looked out at the Harlem skyline, she sometimes wondered if he ever thought of her not with love, but with realization. Did he finally understand what he'd broken? Did he finally see the woman he'd underestimated? She'd never know. One afternoon, as the first rebirth site neared completion, Malik joined her on the rooftop. The city stretched endlessly before them, old and new, wounded and alive. "Feels like a beginning," he said. She nodded. "It is." He glanced at her, the breeze playing with her short curls. "You ever think about going back to the world you came from?" She smiled, eyes fixed on the skyline. "No. That world taught me everything I needed to leave it." Malik smiled. "Good, because this one needs you." For a long time, neither of them spoke. The air smelled of rain and brick dust, of endings and beginnings layered on top of each other. That night, Chloe wrote in her journal again. "Rebirth isn't starting over. It's starting wiser. The past doesn't vanish. It becomes the foundation for what comes next." She paused, staring at the final sentence, then added, "I thought I needed justice. What I needed was purpose." She closed the book and turned off the lamp. The room fell into darkness, gentle, quiet, alive. For the first time in years, she slept without dreaming of pain. Outside, the first rebirth building stood like a promise against the skyline, its windows glowing with soft yellow light. Inside, women unpacked boxes, laughter echoing through hallways that had once been silent. From across the street, Malik watched her, watching them. "You did this," he said. Chloe shook her head. "We did this." Then, almost to herself, she whispered, "Maybe that's the point of falling, to learn how to build something worth standing for." But even rebirth carries shadows. The next morning, an envelope arrived at her office. No return address, no name, just a wax seal pressed in sterling gold. Inside, a single line: "We're not done yet." Chloe looked up, her breath catching the old chill of the past, brushing against the edges of her new life. Outside, Harlem buzzed with morning light, but for the first time in months, she felt the faint tremor of something coming. She folded the letter carefully, placed it in her drawer, and whispered, "Then let's finish it." The headlines came quietly at first, tucked beneath the louder chaos of politics and celebrity gossip. Charles Sterling, removed from Sterling Enterprises board. Chloe Moore, under federal investigation for corporate fraud. But soon their names burned through the media like a slow, satisfying fire. Chloe didn't celebrate. She didn't pour champagne or smile at Malik when the news reached her. She simply closed her laptop and whispered to herself, "It's done." Justice, when it finally arrived, didn't roar. It exhaled. Months passed. Harlem bloomed again around her murals, freshly painted laughter spilling from corner cafes, the scent of roasted coffee and asphalt after rain. The first project of rebirth design had been completed, and women who had once been homeless now had Keys Gardens lives. Each time Chloe visited, she felt a quiet warmth inside a heartbeat of purpose. Still, the past occasionally brushed against her like wind through a half-closed door. There were whispers that Charles had fled to Europe to focus on personal matters. Chloe's company had been dissolved. Neither of them had reached out. Good. Let silence be their punishment. One afternoon, as Chloe was reviewing blueprints in her Harlem studio, her assistant, a bright-eyed architecture student named Layla, rushed in waving an envelope. "Ms. Johnson, you've been invited to speak at the Women in Architecture Summit in D.C. They want you to close the event." Chloe blinked, taken aback. Close the event? Why me? Layla's grin widened. Because you're you, the woman who built an empire from ashes. Chloe exhaled softly, unsure whether to laugh or cry. She wasn't used to being seen anymore, not for what she'd survived, but for what she'd created. The night before the summit, she barely slept. The hotel room was immaculate, too white, too quiet, like a ghost of the life she'd left behind. She stood by the window, gazing at the capital's glow in the distance. The city pulsed with ambition, yet for the first time, she didn't feel small inside it. She thought of the women she'd met over the past year, mothers, builders, dreamers. Women who had been told no and kept going anyway. This speech wasn't about her. It was about them. When the morning came, Chloe dressed simply, a tailored navy suit. Her short curls brushed neatly, a single silver bracelet on her wrist. No diamonds, no logos, just presence. Backstage, as she waited for her cue, she caught her reflection in a mirror. A part of her still trembled, the same part that once feared judgment, once craved approval. She placed a hand over her chest and whispered, "You've rebuilt cities. Now, rebuild yourself one last time." Then the announcer's voice echoed, "Please welcome Chloe Johnson, founder of Rebirth Design." The applause was thunder. The stage lights were blinding. For a second she froze, hundreds of faces staring back at her expectant. But then she found her rhythm, her breath syncing with the heartbeat of the crowd. She began softly, her voice steady but raw. "I used to think architecture was about glass and steel, about how high we could build. But then life showed me that the hardest thing to rebuild is a woman who's been broken." The room fell utterly silent. She continued, "People told me a woman's worth is tied to what she can create through her body. They said that once I lost that ability, I'd lost my meaning. But they were wrong. Because there are children born from dreams, from faith, from the work we leave behind in this world. And I am proof that even after the fire, there is architecture in ashes." Her voice wavered just slightly, then steadied again. "We live in a world that tells women to recover quietly, to rebuild in private. But what if we rebuilt out loud? Together. What if every scar became a design choice, a declaration that we're still here?" The room erupted. When she finished, the audience stood clapping long after she'd stepped away from the microphone. Cameras flashed, tears glistened. Strangers reached for her hands as she passed. but Chloe barely registered any of it. She felt weightless, like every wall she'd ever built inside herself had finally fallen. That evening, her speech went viral. Clips flooded social media. The woman who rose from ashes. Her words were quoted remixed, written on protest signs. Within a week, major publications were calling her the new face of feminine resilience. Interviews, podcast invitations, talk shows. It was overwhelming, yet grounding. For every journalist, she insisted, this isn't about fame. It's about building a world where women don't need to survive alone. But fame, even the kind born from truth, attracts shadows. One evening as she left a community fundraiser, a black sedan idled near the curb. Its tinted window rolled down, just enough for a familiar voice to reach her. Chloe. She froze. Charles. He looked older, thinner, paler, his once slick confidence now cracked. He stepped out slowly, the smell of rain and regret clinging to him. I came to congratulate you, he said, voice low. You've done well. She didn't move. You shouldn't be here. I know, he admitted, but I needed to see for myself. The woman everyone's talking about. His gaze lingered, not with desire, but with something close to awe. You really did rise from ashes. Chloe's jaw tightened. I didn't rise because of you, Charles. I rose despite you. He flinched, his composure breaking. I'm not asking for forgiveness, just acknowledgement. Then here it is, she said quietly. You taught me that power without empathy is a cage. I learned how to break out. He nodded slowly, eyes glistening. You were always stronger than me. She stepped back, voice cool, but not cruel. No, Charles. I just stopped letting you define my weakness. Then she turned, walking away, as the rain began to fall again, soft, cleansing, infinite. That night, she sat in her Harlem apartment watching her own reflection flicker in the windowpane. The headlines still buzzed on her phone, but she let them fade. Malik arrived quietly, 2 cups of coffee in hand. You okay? Chloe smiled. Better than okay. He studied her for a moment, then asked, So what's next for? The woman who rose from ashes, she looked down at her hands, hands that had drawn blueprints, written. Speeches, signed contracts, destroyed empires, and rebuilt homes. Maybe, she said, it's time to build something bigger than myself. Malik grinned. You mean Rebirth 2.0? She shook her head, eyes soft, but determined. A foundation. One that helps women build not just houses, but futures. Something that can't be burned down. He nodded. And you'll lead it. She hesitated, then smiled. No, we will. Later that night when he left, she wrote in her journal, one final time before sleep. They tried to bury me, but they forgot I was a foundation. Outside, the city hummed like a heartbeat, steady and alive. The lights of Harlem shimmered below every window, a story, every woman a spark. Chloe leaned against the glass, her reflection merging with the skyline. The world had once told her she wasn't enough. Now she was rewriting that story brick by brick, woman by woman. But as she turned off the lamp, her phone buzzed again. A new message. Unknown number. Not everyone believes your redemption arc. Be careful who you trust. Her heart stilled. For the first time in months, she felt that old chill return. The shadows weren't gone. They were just waiting for her next move. She set the phone down, exhaled slowly, and whispered, Then let them come. I've built stronger walls this time. The marble halls of the Manhattan Supreme Court smelled faintly of coffee ink and cold ambition. Every step echoed too loudly, too deliberately, as if the building itself demanded reverence. Chloe had never imagined she'd return to this world, the one of suits, cameras, and whispered reputations. But life has a way of circling back to unfinished business. Outside, reporters crowded the courthouse steps, their voices colliding in a storm of microphones and questions. "Ms. Johnson, are you here to testify against your ex-husband? Do you believe Charles Sterling deserves prison time? How does it feel to be the woman who brought down a billionaire?" Chloe said nothing. She simply walked forward, chin lifted, wrapped in a quiet composure that made noise irrelevant. Inside the courtroom, the air was heavy with performance. Lawyers straightened their ties. Journalists scribbled on tablets, and the defendants, Charles Sterling and Chloe Moore, sat side by side at the defense table, their once golden alliance now dimmed by fluorescent light. Charles's hair had gone gray at the edges. His eyes, once glacial and commanding, now flickered with something else, fear maybe, or the slow recognition of his own mortality. Chloe sat beside him, immaculate but trembling, her hands clasped too tightly in her lap. When Chloe entered, a hush fell. She didn't wear the armor of luxury anymore, just a fitted black suit, minimal jewelry, and the kind of presence that made silence stand straighter. The bailiff called her name, Ms. Chloe Johnson. She walked to the witness stand. The sound of her heels against the floor was steady, deliberate. The prosecutor smiled, faintly respectful. "Ms. Johnson, you were once married to Mr. Sterling, correct?" "Yes." "And you currently hold a controlling share of Sterling Enterprises, correct?" "I acquired it legally after his resignation." "Would you tell the court what you discovered prior to his removal?" Chloe took a slow breath. "Transfers, shell accounts, internal funds disguised as charitable donations, and lies." Her voice didn't tremble. It didn't accuse. It simply stated like an architect reading blueprints of ruin. The prosecutor nodded. "And when you discovered this, what did you do?" "I exposed it," she said. "Not to destroy him, but to protect everyone he would have destroyed next." A ripple moved through the courtroom. Across the room, Charles's jaw clenched. His lawyer leaned close, whispering urgently, but he didn't respond. His eyes never left her. When it was the defense's turn, Charles's attorney rose, voice sharp with rehearsed confidence. "Ms. Johnson," he began, "isn't it true that you had a personal motive in bringing these accusations forward? That this is about revenge, not justice?" Chloe looked at him calmly. "If you're asking whether betrayal hurts, yes, it does. But pain doesn't erase the truth." He pressed, "And yet you benefited from Mr. Sterling's downfall. Didn't you?" "His assets, his shares, I didn't benefit." She interrupted softly. "I reclaimed what was mine. The difference is moral, not material." The lawyer frowned, flustered. "So you admit you wanted him punished?" Chloe's gaze hardened. "I wanted him accountable. Punishment was his choice, not mine." A murmur spread among the spectators. Even the judge's pen paused mid-note. Charles's lawyer called him to the stand next. He rose, buttoning his suit jacket, trying to hold on to the poise he once wore like armor. When he took his oath and looked up, his eyes found hers instantly. For a heartbeat, the courtroom disappeared. "Mr. Sterling," the lawyer prompted, "would you like to address the court regarding your actions?" Charles hesitated, then said quietly, "Yes." He turned toward Chloe. "Everything they're saying. It's true," he began. "I moved money. I broke rules. But I wasn't trying to steal. I was trying to save something that was already dying. My company, my reputation, my life." His voice wavered. "When you lose control, you start believing control is all that matters." He glanced down, his hands trembling slightly. "And in that chaos, I lost the only person who ever grounded me." A pause. "Then softly, I lost you, Chloe." The room fell silent. Cameras clicked once, then stopped. Even Chloe turned slightly toward him, confusion shadowing her eyes. Chloe said nothing, her face unreadable. After a long silence, the judge nodded to the prosecutor. Ms. Johnson may cross-examine. Chloe stood. The courtroom seemed to lean forward with her. Charles, she said, voice quiet, but cutting, you didn't lose me. He looked up startled. You never had me, she continued. You had the image. You created the perfect wife to complete your perfect brand. You built an empire out of illusion, and I was one of your blueprints. But I stopped being your project the day you traded integrity for ego. Charles's eyes glistened. I thought I was protecting us. No, she said, shaking her head. You were protecting yourself. From the truth, from vulnerability, from a world where a woman could stand beside you instead of beneath you. Her words hung in the air, like light refracting through glass, sharp, unyielding, beautiful. The judge cleared his throat gently. That will be all, Ms. Johnson. Chloe nodded, turning to leave. As she walked past the defense table, Charles spoke again, barely audible. Broken, I've lost everything, except you. Chloe paused, her expression softening just enough to show she'd heard him. Then, without turning, she said quietly, No, Charles, you never had me. You only ever had a reflection of yourself. The sound of her heels carried her away before he could respond. Outside, the courtroom doors opened into sunlight so bright it felt almost theatrical. The city roared beyond the courthouse cars, honking news crews, shouting, life moving on. Chloe stepped into it with the grace of someone who had finally put down a heavy past. Her black suit caught the wind. Her hair shimmered like onyx under the sun. A journalist called out, Ms. Johnson, do you have any comment? She paused, turned slightly and said simply, Some things rebuild stronger after they fall. Then she walked down the courthouse steps, light cascading around her, each step lighter than the last. In the back of the courtroom, Malik had been watching quietly the entire time. He saw the way she stood not as a witness to destruction, but as proof of endurance. When she reached the bottom of the steps, he was waiting by the curb, hands in his pockets, eyes steady. How did it feel? He asked softly. Chloe looked at him, the corner of her lips curving faintly, like closing the last chapter of a book I should have stopped reading years ago. He smiled. Then maybe it's time to write the next one. She exhaled, looking out toward the city skyline, the city that had once been her prison, now her canvas. Maybe it is, she said. That evening back in Harlem, Chloe sat in her studio as twilight washed over the room. She opened her journal and wrote a single line across the page. Freedom isn't walking away. It's walking forward without needing to look back. She closed the notebook, feeling something unnameable settle inside her. Peace, perhaps, or forgiveness, the kind that doesn't absolve, but releases. Outside her window, the city lights flickered on one by one like constellations reborn. But as she poured herself a glass of wine, her phone buzzed. A notification, an email. No subject line, no name, just a single sentence. You don't know the whole story. Chloe stared at the screen, her reflection caught in the glass, half in shadow, half in light. Somewhere beneath the hum of the city, a new current was stirring. She set the phone down slowly, her pulse steady but alert. Whatever truth remained, she was ready to face it. The morning sun washed over Manhattan like forgiveness. It had been exactly 1 year since the trial, the day Chloe Johnson walked out of that courtroom and into the rest of her life. Now, the city gathered again, not to witness a downfall, but a rebirth. The banners read, Sterling Johnson Foundation, Rebuilding Women, Rebuilding Futures. The marble atrium of the new headquarters gleamed like hope polished into stone. It was the first time the names Sterling and Johnson had appeared together without shame or scandal, two halves of a story finally rewritten. Chloe stood backstage watching the audience gather. Business leaders, journalists, artists, survivors, all women who had known the fracture of loss and the labor of healing. Beside her stood Malik, his hand resting lightly on her back, steady and warm. "You ready?" he asked. Chloe smiled. "I was born ready. I just didn't know it." As the lights dimmed, the massive screen behind the podium flickered to life. A black and white montage played crumbling houses, restored women in hard hats, laughing children running through the hallways of newly built homes. And then came the words, written across the screen in gold. "For the women who have lost their wings, may you learn to fly with the very pain that broke them." The audience rose in applause before Chloe even stepped forward. When she reached the microphone, the room fell silent. She took a deep breath, her short curls catching the light like a crown made of resilience. "A year ago," she began, "my life was a wreckage. I thought destruction was the end. But I've learned something. Destruction can also be a kind of architecture, the foundation where truth begins." Her voice was calm, not rehearsed, but felt. They say when a woman breaks, she either disappears or becomes dangerous. But I didn't want to be feared. I wanted to build, to take what was taken from me and give it back, multiplied to women who were told they couldn't start again. She paused, letting the words breathe. The Sterling Johnson Foundation isn't about revenge or charity. It's about reclamation, about reminding the world that women are not stories of survival. They are blueprints of transformation. A murmur rippled through the room, an energy both reverent and electric. Malik stood at the side, pride shining in his eyes. Chloe looked out over the crowd and saw faces she recognized, architects she'd mentored, young women who had fled abusive homes, single mothers who'd rebuilt their lives through rebirth design. Their eyes met hers, and in that collective gaze, she felt something shift, not power, but peace. After the speech, cameras flashed as she and Malik stood together for photos. He leaned close and whispered, "You made them believe." She turned to him, smiling softly. "No, they made me believe." From the far end of the hall, amid the crowd of donors and dignitaries, she noticed a figure standing slightly apart. Charles. He looked smaller than she remembered. The sharpness in his posture was gone. His arrogance had dissolved into quiet observation. He didn't approach. He didn't need to. His eyes told her everything, a silent apology that words could only cheapen. Chloe held his gaze for a moment. Then she nodded gently as if to say, "It's done." Charles's eyes glistened. He turned and left before anyone could see. As the event ended, Malik and Chloe slipped out onto the rooftop terrace overlooking the Hudson River. The wind was cool, the sky streaked with pink and gold. For a while they stood in silence, watching the city breathe. "It's strange," she said finally. "I thought healing would feel like a finish line, but it feels more like a doorway." Malik smiled, then stepped through it. She turned to face him. "Do you ever wonder if we become too defined by what broke us?" He considered that. Maybe. But maybe that's how we know we're real. She laughed quietly. "You sound like one of my old professors." He shrugged. "Or maybe I'm just a man in awe of a woman who built cathedrals out of pain." Chloe looked at him, really looked at him, not as a business partner or a supporter, but as someone who'd stood beside her in the rebuilding of her soul. "Malik," she said softly, "I don't need saving anymore." "I know," he replied. "That's why I'm here." A gust of wind swept across the terrace, lifting the ends of her blazer. She closed her eyes and let it move through her, like the city itself was exhaling the last remnants of her past. "I used to think revenge was power," she said. "Now I know power is choosing peace even when you have every reason not to." Malik nodded, his gaze steady on hers. "So what now, Chloe Johnson?" She smiled, turning toward the horizon where the river caught the fading light. "Now," she said, "I build something that outlives me." That evening, as the city glowed beneath her office window, Chloe found herself alone again. Only this time, the silence didn't feel empty. She walked through the nearly finished top floor of the foundation building, where a quote was being engraved into the marble wall. She ran her fingers over the words, "Strong women don't seek revenge to cause pain, they rise to prove they cannot be destroyed." Her eyes stung, but she smiled. Behind her, Layla entered quietly, holding a file. "The board wants your approval on the next project proposal." Chloe turned, her tone gentle. "What is it?" Layla's eyes gleamed. "An expansion in Nairobi, women-led housing initiatives. They want it under your leadership." Chloe nodded slowly. "Send me the plans tomorrow morning." As Layla left, Chloe glanced out at the city lights, the hum of New York alive and endless. A year ago, she'd thought her story was over. Now she understood it had only been an introduction. She returned to her desk and opened her leather-bound journal, the one that had followed her through pain, revenge, and rebirth. She turned to the last page, the one she'd kept blank on purpose, and wrote, "This isn't a victory. It's a return to self. Forgiveness isn't letting someone go. It's freeing yourself from the gravity of what they did. And love. Love is the courage to begin again." She signed it simply, AJ. Then she closed the book, placed it on the shelf beside blueprints of every rebirth home she had designed, and stepped out onto the balcony. The wind caught her hair again, the city below glowing like an ocean of stars. Somewhere in the distance, church bells rang, a sound of endings or beginnings, depending on how you listen. Chloe tilted her head back, eyes tracing the sky. "I don't need to win anymore," she whispered. "I already have." And for the first time in years, she didn't feel like she was rising from ashes. She felt like she was flying. Strong women do not seek revenge to inflict pain. They rise to prove they cannot be destroyed. But as she turned to leave the terrace, her phone buzzed once more. A new message from an unknown number. "We need to talk. It's about the foundation's funding. Something isn't right." The screen went dark. The city lights flickered, and Chloe realized the story wasn't over.